Everyone believed I'd moved on. Even the man who once promised to love me forever. If you'd seen me 3 years after my divorce, you would have thought I'd rebuilt my life perfectly. I had a stable job, a cozy apartment filled with plants, and a quiet routine that looked peaceful from the outside. My social media showed weekend coffee dates with friends, hiking trips, and sunsets with captions about gratitude and fresh starts. People called me strong. My family said I was finally happy again. And my ex-husband, Ethan Carter, believed he'd become nothing more than a closed chapter in my life. He was wrong. The truth was that every smile had been carefully practiced in front of a mirror. Every cheerful photo had been taken after wiping away tears. Every night, after everyone stopped calling and the world became quiet, I sat alone in my living room with the lights off, wondering how my life had fallen apart so completely. Not because I still wanted Ethan back. That part of my heart had died long ago. What haunted me wasn't the divorce. It was the secret I'd carried ever since. A secret so painful that I had promised never to tell another living soul. A secret that had destroyed my marriage long before the divorce papers were signed. 3 years earlier, Ethan and I looked like the perfect couple. We met at a charity fundraiser when I was 28. He was funny, thoughtful, and the kind of man who made everyone around him feel important. Our first conversation lasted almost 4 hours. By the end of the night, he asked if he could take me to dinner. 6 months later, he proposed. A year after that, we were married. For a while, life felt like a dream. We bought a modest house. We planned vacations. We talked about having children. Every Sunday morning, we'd drink coffee on the porch and imagine what our future family would look like. Those memories still hurt. Because they reminded me of the man Ethan used to be before fear changed everything. The first signs were small. He began working late more often. He seemed distracted. Whenever I asked what was bothering him, he'd smile and say everything was fine. I wanted to believe him. Instead, I ignored the growing distance between us. Months later, everything changed. One rainy evening, Ethan came home unusually quiet. He barely touched his dinner. Then he looked at me with tired eyes. "I don't think we're happy anymore," he said softly. I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because I genuinely thought he was joking. We had problems, yes. But divorce? That had never crossed my mind. Then he looked down at the table. "I think we should separate." The room felt like it stopped breathing. I couldn't understand what had happened. Only days earlier we'd been talking about repainting the guest room. Now my husband was asking to end our marriage. I begged him to explain. He simply said we'd grown apart. That was it. No argument. No scandal. No dramatic betrayal. Just 4 cold words. We grew apart. Within 2 months, the divorce was finalized. Friends whispered that Ethan must have found someone else. Others blamed me. Some believed I had become too focused on work. Everyone had an opinion. No one knew the truth. Not even Ethan. Because I never told him. I let him walk away believing the marriage had simply failed. It was easier than forcing him to carry the burden I'd been carrying alone. For 3 years, I kept that promise. Until one ordinary afternoon changed everything. It started with a charity fundraiser. Ironically, the same kind of event where Ethan and I had first met. I almost didn't attend. Work had been exhausting, and I wasn't in the mood to socialize. But my boss insisted. So I put on my favorite navy blue dress, practiced another convincing smile, and walked into the crowded ballroom. I had no idea Ethan would be there. When our eyes met across the room, time seemed to stop. He looked surprised. Then he smiled politely. The kind of smile strangers exchange after years apart. I smiled back. Neither of us knew that before the night ended, he'd hear a conversation that would reveal the truth I'd hidden for 3 long years. And once he learned what really happened, nothing in either of our lives would ever be the same again. If you've ever hidden your pain behind a smile or carried a secret that changed your life, let me know in the comments. And if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss what happens next. The ballroom buzzed with laughter, clinking glasses, and polite conversations. I stood near the refreshments, trying to ignore the familiar ache in my chest. I hadn't expected to see Ethan again. Not here. Not after 3 years. He looked different. His hair was shorter, and there were faint lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He was talking with a group of business partners, smiling politely, but every now and then, I caught him glancing in my direction. It wasn't the look of a man still in love. It was curiosity. The curiosity of someone wondering how his ex-wife had rebuilt her life so effortlessly. If only he knew. A woman suddenly wrapped her arms around me. Lena. I almost didn't recognize you. It was my college friend, Mia. We hadn't seen each other in almost a year. After chatting for a few minutes, she leaned closer. Can we talk somewhere private? I nodded. We stepped onto a quiet balcony overlooking the city lights. The cool evening breeze brushed against my face. For the first time that night, I felt like I could breathe. Mia studied me carefully. You're smiling again, she said softly. But your eyes still look exactly the same. I forced a laugh. I'm okay. She gently shook her head. You don't have to pretend with me. Those words shattered the wall I'd spent years building. Tears filled my eyes before I could stop them. I've been pretending for so long, I whispered. I don't even know who I am anymore. Mia reached for my hand. You still haven't told him, have you? I slowly shook my head. No. And you never will? I promised. Neither of us noticed the balcony door opening behind us. Neither of us realized Ethan had stepped outside after taking a phone call. He wasn't trying to spy. He simply froze when he heard my voice. Hidden by the doorway, he could hear every word. Mia looked at me with disbelief. Lena, he deserves to know. I closed my eyes. If I tell him now, it won't change anything. It might change everything. I sighed deeply. The divorce happened because he thought I'd stopped fighting for us. And that wasn't true. No. So why didn't you tell him? My voice trembled. Because the day he asked for a separation. I had just received the diagnosis. Mia gasped. Even after all these years, saying those words out loud still hurt. I remember sitting in my car outside the hospital, I continued. I couldn't even start the engine. The doctor had told me I needed treatment immediately. I was terrified. I wanted to tell Ethan that night. But before I could, he said he wanted a divorce. Behind the door, Ethan stopped breathing. His heart pounded so loudly he thought someone might hear it. Diagnosis? Hospital? Treatment? What was she talking about? I continued, unaware that every word was reaching him. I saw how exhausted he looked. He already seemed overwhelmed by work. I couldn't bear the thought of making him spend years taking care of a sick wife. So, I lied. I told him I understood. I signed the papers. I let him believe I had given up. Mia wiped away her own tears. You sacrificed your marriage. I thought I was protecting him. And were you? I looked toward the lights of the city. I honestly don't know anymore. Behind the balcony door, Ethan leaned against the wall. His hands were shaking. His memories began crashing into him all at once. The nights Lena had quietly cried in the bathroom. The hospital appointment she'd claimed was just a routine checkup. The unopened medical envelope he'd noticed on the kitchen counter. He had never asked questions. He had been too distracted. Too convinced the marriage was already over. His stomach twisted with guilt. What if? What if everything he believed about their divorce had been wrong? What if the woman he'd spent years thinking had simply stopped loving him had actually been protecting him all along? Before he could gather himself, another sentence brought him to tears. "I still pray he's happy," I whispered. "I've never hated him. I only hated that I didn't have the courage to tell him the truth." Ethan covered his mouth to stop himself from crying. For 3 years, he had blamed her. For 3 years, he believed she had walked away without a fight. Now he realized she had been carrying a burden completely alone. And the worst part? He still didn't know what illness she had been diagnosed with. But he was about to find out. And when he did, it would destroy everything he thought he knew. Ethan stood frozen outside the balcony doors. His heart pounded so hard it felt painful. Every word Lena had spoken echoed through his mind. I thought I was protecting him. For 3 years, he had convinced himself that she simply stopped loving him. Now that belief was crumbling. Before he realized what he was doing, he stepped onto the balcony. "Lena." His voice was barely a whisper. Lena turned around. The color drained from her face. "Ethan." Mia looked from one of them to the other. She immediately understood. "You heard us." Ethan nodded slowly. I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to listen. I heard my name, and then." His voice cracked. "I couldn't walk away." Silence settled over the balcony. Only the sound of distant traffic filled the air. Finally, Ethan spoke again. "What diagnosis?" Lena closed her eyes. "I don't want to do this. Please." His eyes filled with tears. "I deserve to know." She looked away. "No. I lost that right when we signed the divorce papers." "You never lost that right." Her voice trembled. "You don't understand." "Then help me understand." Mia gently touched Lena's shoulder. "You've carried this alone long enough." Lena took a long, shaky breath. 3 years ago. About 2 weeks before you asked for a separation. I found a lump." Ethan's face went pale. "I went to the doctor alone because I didn't want to worry you. The tests came back. It was breast cancer." The words hit Ethan like a freight train. He staggered backward. "No." Lena nodded slowly. "It was stage 2. I needed surgery. Then months of chemotherapy." Ethan covered his face with both hands. His entire body shook. "Oh, God. I had no idea." "I know. You never gave me the chance to know." Tears streamed down Lena's face. "The night I planned to tell you. You came home. You looked exhausted. You said you weren't happy anymore. You said we should separate. I thought maybe life was giving you a chance to escape before things became worse." Ethan stared at her in disbelief. "So you let me leave? I thought I was setting you free." His voice broke. "You thought I would leave because you had cancer?" She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her silence said everything. Ethan remembered every conversation from those final weeks. The way she'd looked tired. The times she'd quietly canceled dinner plans. The mornings she'd complained about headaches. He had blamed stress. He had blamed distance. He had never imagined she was fighting for her life. "I failed you." The words barely escaped his lips. "No," Lena replied quietly. "We failed each other. You stopped talking. I started hiding. And somewhere in the middle, we lost our marriage." For several moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, Ethan asked the question that terrified him most. "Are you?" He couldn't finish. Lena gave a small smile. "I'm cancer-free now." Relief washed over him so suddenly that his knees almost gave out. He whispered a quiet prayer of thanks. "But," Lena continued, "it wasn't easy. I went through surgery alone. I sat through chemotherapy alone. I lost my hair. I spent nights wondering if I'd survive. My mother stayed with me whenever she could. Mia never left my side. But every single day, I wished my husband was there. Ethan began crying openly. He no longer cared who saw him. Every memory now carried a different meaning. Every unanswered phone call. Every forced smile. Every goodbye. If he had asked just one more question. If he had stayed one more hour. If he had simply listened. Everything might have been different. I am so sorry. His voice was barely audible. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve it. Lena looked at him with gentle eyes. I forgave you a long time ago. He looked up in surprise. You did? I had to. Because holding on to anger was heavier than carrying the illness. But forgiveness doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't bring back the years we lost. Before Ethan could respond, someone approached the balcony. It was his younger sister, Sophie. She had been looking for him. The moment she saw tears streaming down his face and Lena crying beside him, she knew something was terribly wrong. Ethan. What happened? He slowly turned toward his sister. His voice was filled with regret. I just learned the biggest mistake of my life. And as more people from the fundraiser began noticing the emotional scene on the balcony, neither of them realized that the truth was about to spread far beyond the two of them. Some people would offer compassion. Others would pass judgment. But one unexpected person would soon step forward with a confession that would change everything they thought they knew about the end of their marriage. Within minutes, whispers spread across the ballroom. People tried not to stare, but it was impossible to ignore the emotional scene on the balcony. Ethan quietly walked Lena to a private lounge away from the crowd. Neither of them spoke. There were simply too many years of silence between them. A few moments later, the door opened. Sophie stepped inside carrying 2 glasses of water. She placed them on the table before looking nervously at Lena. I owe you an apology. Lena frowned. For what? Sophie clasped her trembling hands together. I've wanted to tell you the truth for 3 years. Ethan looked at his sister in confusion. What truth? Tears filled Sophie's eyes. The divorce. It wasn't only because you two stopped communicating. Ethan stared at her. What are you talking about? She took a deep breath. A week before you asked Lena for a separation. I came to your office. I remember, Ethan replied. You said Lena had been distant. Sophie nodded. But that's not all I said. She lowered her head in shame. I told you she'd been meeting another man. Lena's eyes widened. What? I lied. Silence filled the room. Ethan looked as though the air had been knocked out of his lungs. You lied? Sophie burst into tears. I saw Lena leaving the hospital with a man. I didn't know he was an oncologist. I assumed the worst. I convinced myself she was having an affair. Lena covered her mouth in disbelief. The man you saw was Dr. Michael Hayes. He was explaining my treatment plan. I was too overwhelmed to drive home. So he walked me to my car. Sophie's sobs grew louder. I know that now. But back then, I thought I was protecting my brother. Ethan slowly sank into a chair. His memories suddenly became painfully clear. The strange questions he'd asked Lena. The growing suspicion in his mind. The way he'd started believing every small misunderstanding. He had never accused her directly. But doubt had quietly poisoned his heart. I should have trusted my wife, he whispered. Lena's voice remained calm despite the tears in her eyes. You should have asked me. I know. I was a coward. Sophie fell to her knees. I'm so sorry. I destroyed your marriage. Lena looked at the young woman who had once been like a little sister to her. She could see genuine regret. Years ago, she might have reacted with anger. Now, She simply felt exhausted. I forgive you. Sophie's head snapped up. You, what? I forgive you. Not because what you did was small. It wasn't. It changed all of our lives. But carrying bitterness won't give me those years back. Sophie cried even harder. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Maybe not, Lena replied gently. But forgiveness says more about my healing than your mistakes. Ethan couldn't hold back his tears. The woman he'd believed had moved on without looking back had actually spent years becoming stronger in ways he could barely comprehend. Just then, Ethan's phone rang. He almost ignored it. The caller ID made him freeze. It was Claire. The woman he had started dating nearly a year after the divorce. He hesitated before answering. Hello? Claire's cheerful voice came through the speaker. I've been looking everywhere for you. Are you okay? Ethan looked across the room at Lena. For the first time in years, he saw not his ex-wife, but the woman he had failed when she needed him most. His voice was quiet. I'll explain later. He ended the call. Lena noticed the conflict in his eyes. You should go. What? Your girlfriend is waiting. He slowly nodded. But he didn't move. Instead, he asked the question that had been haunting him all evening. If I had known the truth, would we still be married? Lena closed her eyes. A tear rolled down her cheek. I've asked myself that question 1,000 times. She looked directly at him. But we can never build a future by living inside the past. Those words stayed with Ethan long after he left the room. For the first time, he realized this story wasn't about getting his marriage back. It was about facing the consequences of choices that could never be undone. Yet fate wasn't finished with either of them. Because the next morning, Ethan would receive a package that Lena had written 3 years earlier, a letter she never intended him to read. And after opening it, he would finally understand the depth of her love, and the heartbreaking sacrifice she made in silence. Ethan didn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Lena sitting alone in a hospital waiting room. He imagined her hearing the words, "You have breast cancer," with no one beside her. He imagined her signing divorce papers while secretly preparing for surgery. The thought made him sick. Just after 8 the next morning, there was a knock at his front door. He opened it to find an elderly courier holding a small brown envelope. Mr. Ethan Carter? Yes. This was left with our office 3 years ago. The sender instructed us to deliver it only if she personally contacted us. Ethan frowned. Then why now? The courier looked at his paperwork. Yesterday evening, the sender called and released it. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Lena. With trembling hands, he carried the envelope inside. Written across the front, in Lena's familiar handwriting, were 5 words. If you're reading this. He carefully unfolded the letter. Dear Ethan. If this letter ever reaches you, it means one of 2 things. Either I've finally found the courage to tell you everything, or life made the decision for me. Right now, you're probably wondering why I let you walk away so easily. The truth is, I didn't. Every part of me wanted to beg you to stay. But just hours before you asked for a separation, a doctor looked into my eyes and told me I had breast cancer. In that moment, my future became uncertain. I couldn't ask the man I loved to give up his dreams for endless hospital visits, surgeries, and fear. Maybe I underestimated you. Maybe I made the wrong choice. But every decision I made came from love, not pride. If I survive, I hope one day you'll remember me without anger. If I don't, please don't blame yourself. Go on living. Fall in love again. Become the father you always dreamed of being. Smile when you think of me. That will be enough. I have loved you every single day. Even on the day we signed our divorce papers. Love always. Lena. By the time Ethan reached the final line, his vision was blurred with tears. He clutched the letter to his chest and broke down. For years, he had believed Lena gave up on their marriage. Instead, she had been preparing him for a life without her. A life she wasn't even sure she'd be alive to see. Later that afternoon, Ethan drove to a quiet park overlooking the lake. It was the place where he had proposed to Lena years ago. To his surprise, she was already there, sitting on a bench with a cup of coffee, watching the ducks glide across the water. She smiled gently when she saw him. "I figured you'd read it." He nodded. "I almost wish I hadn't." She looked out across the lake. "I almost wish I'd had the courage to give it to you back then." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Ethan turned toward her. "I've spent 3 years believing I was the victim. But after hearing your story, I realized I wasn't. We were both hurting. We were both afraid. We just chose different ways to survive." Lena smiled sadly. "That's probably the truest thing you've ever said." Ethan took a deep breath. "I need to ask you something." She looked at him. "Would you ever consider?" Before he could finish, Lena gently raised her hand. "No." He fell silent. She wasn't angry. She wasn't bitter. She was simply certain. "I'll always care about you, Ethan. A part of me probably always will. But the woman you married no longer exists. Cancer changed me. Loneliness changed me. Learning to rebuild my life changed me. I finally found peace. And I can't lose that peace trying to rewrite the past." A tear slipped down Ethan's cheek. "I understand." For the first time since the divorce, he truly did. He reached into his pocket and unfolded the letter one last time. "I'll keep this forever." Lena smiled. "Not to punish yourself. To remind yourself. Love isn't just about staying. It's about listening. It's about asking one more question before walking away." Months later, Ethan married no one. Instead, he devoted his weekends to volunteering at a local cancer support center, helping families who were facing the same fears he once failed to understand. Lena continued rebuilding her life. She became an advocate for early breast cancer screening, encouraging women never to ignore the warning signs or face difficult diagnoses alone. Although their marriage could never be restored, something else had been healed. The guilt. The silence. The misunderstanding. Sometimes, closure isn't found in getting someone back. Sometimes, closure is finally knowing the truth, and allowing it to make you a better person. If this story teaches us anything, it's this. Never assume you know what someone is carrying behind a smile. A simple conversation can save a relationship. A little patience can prevent years of regret. And kindness is never wasted. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs this reminder today. Let us know in the comments, do you think Ethan and Lena made the right choices, or could everything have been different if they had been honest? The letter stayed in Ethan's jacket pocket for days. He read it every morning before work. Every night before bed. Each time, another sentence broke his heart. Not because Lena had hidden the truth, but because she had faced the darkest season of her life believing she had to face it alone. One Saturday morning, Ethan found himself standing outside a small neighborhood cafe. Mia had agreed to meet him. She arrived carrying 2 cups of coffee. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Mia slid 1 cup across the table. "So, what do you want to know?" Ethan stared at the steam rising from his coffee. "Everything." Mia sighed. "I was afraid you'd ask that." She reached into her purse and placed a small notebook on the table. "I kept notes." Ethan looked confused. "Notes?" Lena's treatment schedule. Her medications. The days she was too weak to leave her bed. He slowly opened the notebook. Every page carried dates. Doctor appointments. Chemotherapy sessions. Blood tests. Emergency hospital visits. Beside many of the entries, Mia had written short reminders. Bring soup. She couldn't stop crying today. Lost more hair this morning. Pretended she wasn't scared. Ethan's hands began to shake. He turned another page. A photograph slipped onto the table. It showed Lena sitting in a hospital chair. She was smiling. But the smile didn't reach her eyes. Her hair was gone. She wore a knitted cap and held a blanket around her shoulders. When was this? Ethan whispered. The day after her second chemotherapy session. She asked me to take that picture. Why? Because she wanted proof that she was still fighting. Tears filled Ethan's eyes. I should have been there. You should have. Mia didn't say it with anger. She simply stated a painful truth. But Lena made sure you never knew. Ethan looked up. Did she ever hate me? Mia smiled sadly. Not once. She was disappointed. Heartbroken. Lonely. But she never hated you. Even on the worst days, she defended you. Ethan buried his face in his hands. I don't deserve that. No. You don't. The honesty stung. But she chose forgiveness anyway. A week later, Ethan visited Lena's mother, Margaret. She welcomed him inside with surprising kindness. The living room looked almost exactly as he remembered. Only one thing was different. On a bookshelf sat a framed photograph of Lena. She had no hair. She was smiling beside a hospital nurse while holding a small bell. Margaret noticed him staring. That was the day she finished chemotherapy. Ethan walked closer. I've never seen this picture. She didn't want you to. Margaret opened a drawer and removed a worn-out journal. Lena left this here during treatment. She handed it to him. I think she'd want you to read one page. He carefully opened it. A bookmark rested halfway through. The page was dated nearly 3 years earlier. He began reading. Today was my hardest treatment yet. I wanted to call Ethan. I even picked up my phone. But I remembered the divorce papers. He deserves peace. So instead, I cried until I fell asleep. Ethan couldn't continue. His tears blurred the ink. Margaret gently placed a hand on his shoulder. I watched my daughter survive cancer. But watching her believe she had to survive it alone. That almost broke me. Months passed. Ethan couldn't change the past. But he refused to waste the future. He quietly began volunteering every Saturday at a local cancer support center. Not because he wanted praise. Not because he hoped Lena would notice. But because he finally understood how much one caring person could mean to someone fighting for their life. One afternoon, as he arranged care packages for patients, he heard a familiar voice behind him. I wondered how long it would take before I found you here. He turned. Lena stood in the doorway. She smiled warmly. Not with romance. Not with regret. But with genuine peace. I heard you've been helping here every weekend, she said. He nodded. I'm trying to become the man I should have been. Lena looked around the room at the volunteers comforting patients and their families. Then she looked back at Ethan. You can't rewrite yesterday. I know. But you can make sure someone else doesn't have to face tomorrow alone. Ethan smiled through tears. I finally understand that. For the first time in years, they embraced. It wasn't the embrace of husband and wife. It was the embrace of two people who had finally laid down the weight they had carried for far too long. As they stepped apart, Lena smiled. Take care of yourself, Ethan. You too, Lena. She walked toward the exit without looking back. This time, Ethan didn't chase her. Because love isn't always about holding on. Sometimes the greatest act of love is letting someone walk toward the life they've fought so hard to rebuild. He watched the door close behind her. Then he turned back to the waiting room. A frightened young husband sat beside his wife, who had just received a cancer diagnosis. Ethan walked over, sat beside him, and quietly said, "You don't have to go through this alone." The man looked up with grateful eyes. And in that moment, Ethan realized that while he could never change his own story, he could help change someone else's. Thank you for watching. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs this reminder. Never assume you know what another person is carrying. Sometimes, one conversation can change a life forever.